Hello, this is Eric again from Two Peas Same Pod, a father-daughter podcast featuring myself, Eric Weinstein, and my daughter, Tova Weinstein. A father-daughter podcast really about nothing but everything. And as Tova would say, the generational differences between a young adult and her middle-aged plus father. I appreciate all the positive feedback I received from people who saw the first video where I talked about fountain pens. I did mention in that video, as I've mentioned on the podcast, that I do make fountain pens and regular rollerball pens and ballpoint pens, among other things, up in my workshop. I have a small workshop where I do some lathe work, which is really wood turning, or in this case, acrylic turning. I thought I would do a really short video to show people what a pen kit looks like before anything has happened to it or how it comes, and then what the final product is. This will be a short video, just again, helping me learn how to edit on iMovie and hopefully provide some education and information to people who might be interested in this sort of thing. So without any further ado, I order many pen kits from a variety of different companies across the country, including some overseas. This kit that you're looking at, this is called the Conservative. Since I'm in Massachusetts, it really should be called the Raging Liberal. But for now, I'll go with the name that they've offered up, which is called the Conservative. I don't understand how or why, but that's what they call it. It comes in a package. When you buy a pen kit, it comes in a package like this. These are all the parts. I've taken a package out and taken it apart. And so within a package for a fountain pen, or at least for this particular fountain pen, you get two tubes, two brass tubes. This is the barrel. You can see the longer one is the barrel, and you can see the shorter one is the cap. Okay. These are the different components. Right here we have what's called the section, the feed, and the nib. You can see this. These kits come with a Schmidt nib. Schmidt is a company in Germany that makes fountain pen parts and nibs. This is called the feed, which goes down into the section because the ink comes down through the feed and up into the feed and onto the nib. But they also make very nice high-end rollerball refills. I use them when I make rollerball pens and when I replace the ink in my own rollerball pens at work. This is the cap. Most caps do not have this little plastic piece here, but this cap liner, this plastic piece that goes inside the cap, this is actually where in this particular kit, the cap snaps in. So I'll show you at the end because I made one of these kits yesterday from this particular resin. So you'll be able to see what that looks like. This is the end finial that goes on the bottom of the barrel. We'll talk about that more shortly. And this was the resin that I chose. Now I have made my own resin in the past, and I do have the kits to make my own resin. This looks red and blue, and it certainly did on my computer when I ordered it, but it actually turns out to be much more purple. You can see there's some purple in there. And then once you have turned it down and finished it, it looks much more purple. I'll show everybody that in a second. So basically, with making a pen with a pen kit like this, you would take the brass tube and you'd hold it up against the resin and you would mark it there, and then you would cut a piece that's just a little bit longer than the brass tube here, and then you would do the same with the second one. Usually about a 6-inch piece of resin is enough to cut the two parts. This particular kit is longer. It has a very long barrel, and even the cap is a little extended. So you need to have a longer piece. This piece is more than enough. I have these pieces in either 12 or 14-inch rods, and I was able to cut one from this yesterday. So basically what you do is you cut it to size, you drill to size. All the kits come with instructions, and in this particular case, I think this is a 10 millimeter barrel. So you put a 10 millimeter drill bit on your drill press or on your lathe, and you drill a hole through, all the way through. You have to be careful that you don't blow it out. So a lot of times I'll drill about halfway, and then I'll flip it over, put it back in the chuck, and then I'll drill the other half, and they'll meet in the middle. And so that prevents blowouts on the end, because once you have a blowout, you pretty much can't use the blank. It has to be thrown away. So you drill, you cut, and you drill both. In this particular case, this is also 10 millimeters, this upper tube. Most tubes of two-barrel pens, most pen kits with a 2-tube kit have different size drill bits that are necessary. In this particular case, I chose this particular kit because it only uses the same size drill bit and the 2 blanks. The upper cap blank, the shorter one, is 10 millimeters, as is the barrel. So it's a little bit easier. You don't have to worry about multiple drill sizes and all that. But in any event, that's why I chose this particular kit. So what you do is you drill. After you've drilled, then you glue in the tube. Okay, you slide the tube in. Usually what I use is a medium thick, what they call CA, cyanacrylate glue. That's really just super glue, but it's medium thick, and I put it around the tube, and I twist the tube in, and I put it inside. Same thing with the cap. And then what you do is you put the parts on the lathe to turn. Okay, in this particular case, you can do it at one point in time. I do not. I turn my barrels and my caps separately. So I put in this particular case yesterday, I put the barrel on first, turn that down to size, and then I put the cap on, turn that down to size. Now, you're wondering, what is to size? What do I mean by that? Well, for kit pens, not custom made, what they call bespoke pens, which I do not make. It's a little too complicated for me, or maybe a little too labor intensive. But for kit pens, they have what are called bushings. And these bushings are these small pieces of metal. And what you do is you slide the bushing onto the pen mandrel that's holding, that's going to hold the pieces, and you slide it, and then you put, I'll use the end bushing here, and you put the other bushing on the other side. And basically, if you can see, you can't really see, but you see how there's a little bit of a step. Okay, you can see there's a little bit of a step there. Basically, you're going to turn the barrel as it spins in the lathe. You're going to use your tools, and you're going to turn the barrel down to match that diameter right there, which is obviously a little bit bigger than the 10 millimeter tube. All right, so you're going to turn it down on both ends to match the diameter. Okay, same thing with the upper tube. Now these happen to be all the same size. I know that, and so you can use either. Now if you're going to mount it on the lathe at the same time, you could do it like this. The bushings come in 3. Okay, you put the end bushing, the center bushing, and the other end bushing. Okay, and then you turn it down to meet or to match just about those end bushings, and the bushings on either end. A lot of times you end up with a profile, because by hand it's very hard to get a straight line from one bushing to the other. There's oftentimes a little rounding to it. I happen to like that. It's very pleasant, fits in my hand very well, but I oftentimes keep a straight edge with me at the lathe, and I try to get it down so that there's very little over here, that it's just straight across. Not that easy, but we do our best. And so you turn it down to size, and then after you have turned it down to size, that's when the sanding begins. Now, sanding requires a little bit of concentration. Because you've turned the blank, the acrylic in this particular case, I also do wood, but you've turned the acrylic down just to where the bushing is. You don't want to sand it below that bushing. Sometimes you leave it what they call a little proud of the bushing, just a hair higher up than the bushing, because you're going to take some off while you're sanding it. Because of the tooling I use, because I use skews, which are very sharp and leave a very smooth surface, and I often use what are called negative rake scrapers, which are also going to leave a very smooth finish, I usually start my sanding at about 400 grit. Okay, that's pretty high. Certainly would start lower if I was doing wood, but with acrylic you can start a little bit higher. And basically what you do is, once you've turned the blank down to its size, I then do mount the blanks on the lathe at the same time. And I don't use these bushings. I've turned it pretty much down to where it needs to be. And so I use different bushings that I don't worry about scratching, because you don't want to scratch and wear down the bushings at all, because then it'll affect any future pens that you make. You won't quite be making them. And because those bushings are sized to like these parts, which I'll explain more in a minute, but these bushings are the same diameter as that cap lip. Okay, and so you need to match those diameters when you're turning the acrylic, because you need everything to fit nice and clean and flush. And so once you start sanding, I usually sand lightly at 400 or 600, and then I go up to 800, and then I go up to 1200. And then once I'm at 1200, I switch over to a product from sandpaper to now what's called micro mesh. Now, micro mesh is basically a sanding and polishing type of material. Maybe I will post a picture of what a micro mesh kit looks like. It comes in 9 pieces, 9 different grits, so that you can follow sort of the grit line and move up that line. So I go on a 1500 micro mesh, and then it's a 2000 micro mesh and a 2400 micro mesh, and so on and so on, all the way up from 1500 to 12,000. When you get up to like the 6,000 or really 8,000 and 12,000, which are the last 2 of 9, those grits are really just polishing. But by doing the micro mesh, and I do it wet, I keep a thing of water upstairs in my workshop with me, and I am soaking the micro mesh pads, and I'm taking them out and I'm doing them wet, because you want to keep the acrylic cool. If it heats up, it's going to either crack or it's going to blow out. You want to keep it cool, and the way to keep it cool is by sanding wet. So now I have turned it, I have now sanded it, and now I'm working on my micro mesh. And there are a lot of people who use a lot of different products. I use micro mesh and water, and I just go through all the steps. And when I get to that final step, it's usually fine. There are things, people use Meguiar's, which is an auto body or headlight polishing liquid that you can buy at any auto body store or Walmart or Target. There are other products that are made specifically for turned acrylics, but I go through micro mesh. And at the very end of micro mesh, I dry it off, and then I take some Renaissance wax, which is a specialized product, but you can buy it in a lot of different crafts stores. It's very expensive, but I'm still working on the same can that I bought in 2009 because it takes very little. And that's just a wax. And what you do is you put a little on your finger and you rub it across and you spin it on the lathe, and then you take a dry paper towel. In my case, I use Blue Shop towels that I get at Harbor Freight, and I just rub it in and I let it get hot by the friction, and I let it melt on. It doesn't really melt much, but I let it melt on, and that creates a fingerprint-less finish. It doesn't hold fingerprints. Renaissance wax does not hold on to fingerprints, which is fantastic. So what does it look like when it's all done? Well, I can tell you, when I looked at this yesterday, this acrylic, I thought, okay, well, this is nice. It's blue, it's red, got a little bit of purplish to it, but I'm hoping I was going to get more blue and red, and sometimes you never know what you're going to get. That's true of wood, especially when you're turning wood. You really don't know what's on the inside until you're down there. But without any further ado, this is what it looked like when I was finished. Okay, this. I don't know if you can see it. I'm not doing a very good job of this, but it is a bluish, reddish, purplish swirl, leaning more heavily into purple, but it is phenomenal. And this is a pull cap. Okay, it's a snap cap, all right. And this is what it looks like when it's completed. You know, this is how, you know, you hold the pen just like a regular fountain pen. Okay, as I've commented before, in the old days, I held my pen like this, leaning on my ring finger instead of my middle finger. But now I have sort of been teaching myself to go back to holding it the right way. This is a snap cap. Like I said, it's got a nice snap to it. Okay, nice and loud. And as you saw, it was hard to get off. That'll break in over time. That'll break in. It's that plastic liner right here that is meeting up with the lip on the inside of that thing right there. That's what you're hearing on the inside. I'm not going to push it on because I don't want to have to struggle to pull it off right now. But that's what's happening. And once the nib goes all the way in and it goes into that cap liner, it's going to click. Now that cap liner is actually providing 2 different features. One is that it's a snap fit, so it's going to hold the nib. And the other is that it's creating a fairly airtight seal over the nib so that the nib is not going to dry off. Okay, and that's important when you're using a fountain pen, because you put it down at the end of the day and you come back the next morning and you go to write, and it gives you what's called a hard start. It doesn't start up right away. I'm just going to keep that on to protect it. That's how it came. So basically, after you've polished it up, you know, this is what the final pen looked like, but just as far as assembly goes, I take it off over to my workbench, and what I do is I have what's called I guess you'd call it a pen vise, or a vise that I use to push the parts together. And these are pressure fits. Okay, so like I said, you want the diameters to match. So what you do is you take this and you push it in, and then you take it onto the vise or the press, pen press, and you push it in. You do it slowly, but you apply pressure to it and it slides in. And then the same thing with the cap. You do it on the cap side. You're going to push it in, and then it's going to reach the point. So you're going to push it in, and then you're going to take the pen press and you're going to push it in all the way. You see how it worked out here. It's flush. You can see it is flush with the piece of acrylic, and it's flush with the piece of acrylic. And that's because I used the bushings, and those are the size of the bushings. And that's why it's important to match up those bushings and not go below. But you can also see the profile here is a little bit rounded. Okay, you can see there's a little bit of rounding there. And that is because I'm doing it freehand. There's no machinery involved other than the lathe that's spinning the piece of acrylic very fast, usually about 2,500 RPMs. And I'm just doing it by eyesight and by feel. And I'm rubbing my hand on it a lot to kind of feel where there's bulges. Same thing with the cap, and you just turn it down. You just turn it down to that. So anyway, in this particular case, like I said, there's no real finish on it. There's a little bit of Renaissance wax. Great stuff. I think I got this kit from Turner's Warehouse, which is in Arizona. There are a whole bunch of other places online that you can get kits from, but I happen to like that, and I like the owner. I like his videos on YouTube, Chad Schimmel, and he's got good product. And so this has been Eric with 2Ps Same Pod, talking a little bit about handmade pens, but from a kit. If anybody has any comments, feel free to leave them below, or feel free to send me an email at Eric, E-R-I-C, at 2pssamepod.com. That's the number 2, P-E-A-S, samepod.com. Until next time, America, peace out and peas out.